Today, I'm going to talk about the Pennywise universe and the timeline from the first encounter to present. So, in 1947, in Dreamcatcher, that's when they first saw the Gray Man. The Gray Men came down, and in Dreamcatcher, when they come, they bring this infection or virus that can spread to the trees, animals, and humans. And my theory is, as that's going through everything, it's either contaminating and then just, infecting people, or it's part of Pennywise, and that's how Jonesy ended up getting infected, is because it can actually possess the host, and you just have to find the right person with enough power. So that's the first incident. The second time there's an encounter with Pennywise is when the Loser Club is all meeting him. When Georgie meets Pennywise the fall before summer, Pennywise introduces himself as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, Bob Gray, and the Crimson King. And those are all names that are referenced in other books. The Crimson King is from Insomnia, Bob Gray is from Dreamcatchers, and then in Insomnia and Dreamcatcher, they talk about Crimson a lot, and in Dreamcatcher, the Abraham Kurtz, he mentions the virus as being Crimson Pirates. Like they're trying to invade and take over people, things like that. And then in Insomnia, Pennywise is called the Crimson King. And so I think that's another connection trying to say, those are either a form of Pennywise or the Gray Men come from Pennywise. So each of the members have their own encounter, Stan, Beverly, Mike, all of them. And when they're doing their little ritual to get out of the storms, Beverly thinks of a tribe that does sacrifices to a stone idol, much like the book that Paul writes for Annie in Misery, where Misery is going to be sacrificed to a stone idol. And then the reason that Mike is even in the Loser Club and is alive is because Dick from The Shining saves his dad from the black spot, the fire. And that's how Mike's dad comes back, and Mike gets involved with the Loser Club and completes the lucky number 7. So then in 1967, Lester and his wife have their first baby. He's 3 years old at the point that he's killed. And he dies from what they called crib death or SIDS, but the dad is like, he was 3 years old. SIDS wouldn't kill a 3-year-old. And basically the doctor that he's talking with, his psychiatrist, is like, well, if they don't really know what happened, then they just mark crib death because they can't really prove anything. But oh my goodness, that poor baby, when you read The Boogeyman, the way they describe it, it just doesn't sound normal. That's not, at least I would not expect SIDS to look like that. And in The Boogeyman, the dad mentions that the door is cracked slightly, even though he had closed it, and that the room smelled of kind of this decay aroma with leaves. So Lester lives in Connecticut, which is 6 hours away from Maine. I don't know exactly where he is in Connecticut, so he could be a little closer, could be slightly further, but 6 hours, that's not too far. Maine's not too far from Connecticut, so I think it's very possible that Pennywise either has a sewer or a storm drain that connects to a sewer there, or just is able to travel at least a little bit of a way. And then with the boogeyman, he's described by Lester as a leaf man. Like, he moves and it sounds like leaves crumpling, and he smells like leaves. And when Bill encounters Georgie, being like the puppet of Georgie that Pennywise is trying to manipulate Bill with when they're in the sewers, Bill is almost convinced, and then he realizes that Georgie wouldn't talk to him the way he is, and like he wouldn't be scared of Georgie. And when he attacks Georgie, he realizes that he's made of just leaves. He's a leaf man. That's his exact words, is Georgie is just a leaf man, or a puppet made of leaves. And the fact that Lester uses the words leaf man to describe the boogeyman, that's when I was like, oh, there's a connection there. And I think that's valid, especially given the other information about the boogeyman. And then with their second baby, she had been in their room. Then they moved her to the room that her brother had died in. And it was the same crib and everything, and the dad just was like, we just changed the mattress. That's the only thing. The baby lives to about 2. And then around 2, the baby starts saying closet, but in like a 2-year-old voice or speak. And one night, she screams really loud, and I believe the dad goes and checks on her, and he finds her, and she's like dying at that point that he walks in, and she's too far gone to really save. And then we don't get the time frame for the last baby, but it seems like it's about a year after, just a little bit over a year, they end up moving because their old house just had a lot of bad memories. For the first year after they move, everything's good. And then they notice over time that they're both angry with each other, like things are starting to feel just not right. The dad's scared to put anything in the closets, so he leaves his shoes out in the hall, and the baby starts crying in the middle of the night. Before that, never had a problem. And then whenever his wife goes to work at night, he notices that he can hear things moving around in the closets, and he can start to smell that leafy, like decayed smell. And he thinks that whatever it was that got his first 2 babies followed them, and it took him a year to find them, but he moved through the sewers like Pennywise, and now he's back. So the dad is trying to keep the baby in his room with him, but then the monster starts getting more bold and is harassing the dad. So the dad selfishly puts the baby in its own room so that the boogeyman will kill the baby and not him. But he says to the psychiatrist that he's talking to that he thinks all of the kids who disappear or end up dying and no one can find a trace of them, it's because they're dying from real life versions of the monsters they're scared of, which sounds a lot like Pennywise. The last baby, I assume, died somewhere before 1985. We don't really get the ending year, but I assume that. And then in 1985, that's when the losers kill Pennywise. But I don't think they actually did, because later on, there's evidence that he's still around. When the losers kill Pennywise, Ben notices that there's spider eggs all over the floor, and he points it out to them. And he goes, hey, Pennywise's girl, there's eggs everywhere. We have to kill all the babies. So Ben kills all the babies, and then I think that sounds a lot like the virus from the Dreamcatcher. And so I think it was virus they were seeing, but they didn't really know how to envision that, and so they just saw spider eggs instead. And then in 1988, that's when Dreamcatcher goes on, and the boys meet at the Tracker Brothers, and that's where they find Duddits, and that's when they get their powers. And then the virus, like I said, it seems like that could have been the eggs, but the kids saw it as either spider eggs because Pennywise took the shape of a spider, or because the virus, they wouldn't really know what that is, and so they saw what they wanted to see. But the virus has a hive mind, and I think that because there's only one Pennywise, probably asexual, and just reproduces without a mate, the virus, I think, is a form of eggs for Pennywise, because he sends them in a ship that looks super old, like older than anything that they've ever seen. That's what the agents say when they find the ship. They say this is something like some type of material that they've never seen before. It looks ancient, and because it's a hive mind, I think it's all connected to Pennywise, and even though he's supposedly dead, somehow he's still sending out those aliens. And then as you go on, Henry from Dreamcatcher, he sees a statue. It's like a monument that the Losers Club had made and put up for Stan and all of the kids that had died from the 50s to the 80s. Pennywise still lives. And so I think they are correct. Then in 1993 to 1998, that's when Insomnia is going on. And in that book, the whole plot of it is that there's other dimensions higher and lower than the physical plane. And throughout it, they say that there's chaos and purpose, and chaos has its own kind of beings that are doing things for that, and then purpose has its own beings, and they're trying to keep the balance of good and evil, essentially. And in Insomnia, it kind of brings together some other books. So the main character in Insomnia, his mom used to get potatoes from Butch Bowers, who's in it. That's Henry Bowers' dad, the bully. And then Gage, they find his sneaker from Pet Cemetery in Atropos's cave, or like his little dwelling. And they find a bunch of other things from people throughout time and all over Derry. But basically, I think Pennywise died on the physical plane, but then was able to go to another dimension and become the Crimson King. And he's able to still, like, do bad things and infect people and destroy their lives by using other beings on those planes. Because Atropos doesn't really have much power, but then somehow he's able to do all of these things and not be seen or noticed by other beings, and the other beings can't interfere with him. And I think it's all because of Pennywise. And basically, the Pennywise timeline just is showing, like, how involved he is, and it's like a whole universe. And Stephen King has stated before that it is its own universe, but it's just fun to see all these little connections. And so, yeah, Pennywise is still alive. I'm interested to see where that goes. I think there's more to come from him, and I need to read more books because I bet there's more references to him.